Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Michelle Jolin, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Results for America. We're proud to be hosting this session today with our partners, the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Today, we're going to be focusing on the revised Uniform Grants Guidance, which is issued by the federal government's Office of Management and Budget. The guidance will help cities better use federal grants to get better results for their residents. But most specifically, the guidance provides clarity about eligible expenses and can help you become a stronger applicant for key federal grants. And importantly, it allows cities to use federal funds more flexibly for various purposes, such as data infrastructure, community engagement, and domestic procurement. Because data infrastructure is so critical to the success of all infrastructure investments, really all government investments, I also wanted to spotlight another important Bloomberg Philanthropies program called What Works Cities, which Results for America leads for Bloomberg Philanthropies. What Works Cities helps cities build a strong data foundation, and it'll help you and your city effectively and efficiently leverage and deploy government dollars. There's a link in the chat to learn more about this Bloomberg program, and we'll send more information about What Works Cities in the follow-up materials. But just wanted to point that out. I know we have some certified cities on the call, Tempe, Detroit, others probably. So I encourage all of you to begin to engage with What Works Cities or continue to work with What Works Cities to support your data building journey. So now let me turn to the experts on today's session about the uniform guidance. As always, we want to make this an interactive session, so please post your questions in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can in the question and answer. I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Deirdre Harrison, who is the Deputy Controller at the Office of Federal Financial Management at OMB. Thank you so much for joining us, Deirdre, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, everyone. I could not be more excited to be here today with all of you. Thank you so much for choosing to prioritize attending this webinar. I know we are going to get into all of the nitty-gritty details of the Uniform Grants Guidance and how it can help you all deliver better on your mission, but I hope you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes to highlight a number of areas where the federal government is doing our best to help you deliver those results in the best possible way. For starters, I want to make sure you all know that just last year we created a new council. It's called COFA, just like sofa. I have to say that, otherwise I will pronounce it wrong every time. But the Council on Federal Financial Assistance was created last year. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary to make sure that as a federal government, we are doing the best that we can to deliver consistently across programs. You're going to hear from me a few times today, and probably during our panel as well, that every single individual program has its own underlying statute and authorities, which sometimes means that you're going to have to take different approaches for different programs. But what that doesn't mean is that the federal government can't work together to identify where we can and should be acting consistently, and that's exactly what the COFA helps us to do. So after we issued the Uniform Grants Guidance, we were able to use that group to really identify government-wide how individual agencies could really work together to ensure effective, efficient, and equitable distribution of funds, while we were also laser focused on reducing administrative burden to all of you and applicants everywhere. In addition to the COFA, we've also been spending a lot of time with our oversight partners, trying to think long and hard about how we can reduce burden when it comes to the single audit compliance supplement. Many of you have to undergo single audits. Before October 1st, if you were a recipient that received more than $750,000, you underwent a single audit. Because of the changes to the Uniform Grants Guidance, that threshold has been increased to $1 million. But that compliance supplement, it's really important that we are working to not just streamline it, but to get it out in a timely way. So that way, when you're working with your auditors, they have all of the information they need at the time in which they need it. We at OMB have been working really hard on that. The last couple of years, we've gotten it out in May, and we are on track to do it again this year. It may sound like a small thing, but I assure you, your auditors having that information in hand earlier in the process really will help all of you to have a more effective and efficient audit throughout the process. We're also looking hard at what programs are in there and how those programs are being reviewed so as to make sure that the process from your end is as streamlined as possible. Standardization really does help, and we are encouraging our auditors and our programs to think about that on your behalf. One other area that I am personally very excited about, and I'm going to ask folks to put this in the chat for you all to check out later, not during the webinar, but later, is the federal program inventory. If you go to www.fpi.onb.gov, we have issued the first ever inventory of programs government-wide. Since 2010, ONB has been required by law to work with agencies to issue this inventory. We've tried a few times and haven't had a lot of success. But earlier this year, we published the federal program inventory, and you can go and find important information about all of the programs that you are eligible recipients for or are already receiving funds. That website is just the start. We will be issuing a comprehensive update to the website at the end of the year, where there'll be a lot more information available. So please check it out today, but also keep it in mind to check it out come the new year, where you'll see additional information about each of those programs. It's a great place to look if you're interested in finding out what types of funding may you be eligible for, who else is receiving funding similar to yours, so you can go and find other recipients that are in the same place, as well as a variety of other information about the programs that you all are applying for and receiving funds. One more area, and then I promise I'll get to the Uniform Grants Guidance, is we have been laser focused on simplifying the announcements of funding opportunities that you all receive when you are considering which programs to apply for. All too often, those announcements are really, really long and hard to get through. It is unclear what the requirements are of you, and it's really unclear whether or not you're eligible. So what we have done is come up with a process following the leadership of the Department of Health and Human Services, who has done a really excellent job in this space, really identifying how in plain English we can lay out upfront in an executive summary who is eligible, what is required, and really help you understand very, very quickly, in hopefully 5 minutes or less, whether or not it makes sense for you to continue digging into the program. We are working this on a government-wide level. All of our agencies that provide grants have identified NOFOs or other announcements this year that they will be simplifying. We are going to use the lessons we learned from this year to make that true across the board for all announcements starting in 2026 and beyond. It is a process that I am very excited about, and we are seeing real improvements, not just for the applicants who often read these applications time and time again, but it is also helping new entrants into our programs, because never before recipients are learning they are in fact eligible or have the ability to apply in ways that they didn't realize. So the Uniform Grants Guidance, why we're actually here. You're here because you know that we rewrote it. You're also here because you probably know what it is, but I did just want to take 2 minutes to describe it from my perspective, because I think sometimes there's some misunderstandings or misconceptions. As I mentioned at the top, every individual program has an underlying statute or authority. So what the Uniform Grants Guidance isn't is the final rules for every single program. Instead, I like to describe it as the least common denominator for those math nerds out there. It's kind of the rules of the road. It helps to put the guideposts and the guidelines in place, but it can't supersede or contravene what is required from some individual programs. So what we have tried to do is really identify the most important things throughout that guidance document that can help you all better deliver on your results in a meaningful way by reducing burden and balancing the impact and the need for oversight. We decided to rewrite this guidance document because, as some of you may know, it was originally the compilation of over a dozen documents. And so the document itself was not very user-friendly. It did not read in a way that was very approachable to folks. I've been known to say that I am not a lawyer, That was a choice I made a very long time ago, but I felt like I needed to be a lawyer to really understand so much of the Uniform Grants Guidance. And I wanted to do what we could to try and make it more approachable to all of the non-lawyers out there. So we spent a lot of time with the lawyers this year, rewriting it in a way that was consistent with what is legally required, but also used plain English and more simple, straightforward terms. We tried to get rid of some of the very complex sentences and say very explicitly and clearly what it was that we were intending to say. The reason why we knew that we needed to go down that route is many of you and other recipients we have been hearing for years have experienced that individual agencies or sometimes individual programs within an agency were interpreting the same section of the guidance in a different way. The data and evaluation components that we're going to talk about today is one of those areas. Not all agencies and programs were interpreting it the way that we intended because our language wasn't as clear and as explicit as it could be. So we identified all of those sections where we could do a better job by either using more clear language, talking in the affirmative instead of in the negative, and really think about how it was going to be read and interpreted in order to encourage recipients to have a more open and transparent conversation with all of the providers of their funding. We also wanted to make sure that we were laser focused on the parts of the guidance that had a big impact on burden for recipients. We know that we need to do compliance and oversight, and we know that we need to have these things in place in order to ensure that we can all work together to deliver the best results. But there were a number of aspects of the guidance that hadn't been updated since its creation and oftentimes decades before. So we went through and reviewed every single threshold in the guidance and identified where we had the statutory authority to make an update. Where we did and thought that it made sense, we did. We've heard from many of you. In particular, you were really, really excited about our de minimis cost, indirect cost rate increase from 10 to 15%. As I mentioned at the top, folks were also very excited about the increase in our single audit threshold from $750,000 to $1 million. There were a number of other thresholds as well that'll hopefully make your jobs easier to come into compliance, but also result in some reduction in paperwork. Another area where we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on was some of these prior approvals that require you all to do work in advance when you want to make a change that might otherwise be considered small or insignificant. So we went through all of the areas of prior approval requirements, and we removed or changed them wherever it was possible. One more area, and then on to data and evaluation, and I want to make sure that I am opening it up for questions as well. We wanted to make sure that we were reinforcing the importance of engaging communities, not just throughout the program development, but also in the issuance of documents. So we were very, very excited to provide a new provision where agencies are now allowed to issue documents in a language other than English. They're not required to do so, but they are allowed to, which was an option that was never before available to them. And so on to the main event, which you are going to hear a lot about. This is one of those areas where we at ONB believe we were clarifying what is allowable. We do not believe that we needed to fundamentally change what was in the guidance document, but we heard you, and we know that many of you have struggled to appropriately fund these costs for a very long time. We know that some of that is because programs and agencies were interpreting the uniform guidance incorrectly, and some of it was because you didn't have awareness or didn't know. And so, as Michelle mentioned at the top, we went in and were very explicit about what the allowable costs are to hopefully help you all to really get to that point where you have the funding and can use the federal funds in order to do the data and evaluation that we all know is so critical. To that end, I want to make sure that I am giving plenty of time for questions, but I also am very much looking forward to the panel. So Michelle, I'll turn it back over to you, and we'll see if there's any questions for me before we get on to the panel.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. And just again, thank you for joining us. This is super helpful. The Local Infrastructure Hub has put together a uniform grants guidance explainer to support cities to maximize the opportunities that you described. So I hope everyone will take a look. We're going to put a link in the chat as well. And would love to have questions from the participants, but I will put one to you first, if that's okay. And specifically, how should cities, given the revisions, how should cities be engaging their technology and data and evidence leaders because of the federal grants guidance process and the uniform guidance revisions? Sort of how do cities collaborate better in order to take advantage of this?
Sure. So first and foremost, we need to be having exactly this conversation, right? Cities need to understand, or states, what are their data needs and how can they use those needs across programs that they are receiving federal funds for. Once they've understand what their plan is and where they want to go and what programs that they are receiving funds for, that's when I want you all to be engaging with your federal agencies. We're going to hear today for some representatives from the federal government. And as I've said, not all programs are created equal. So this is going to be a back and forth and an ongoing discussion. The most important thing you can do is have a plan, because we definitely support the use of these funds for data and evaluation. Have a plan to do it, and then start talking to your federal partners for your particular programs about how to make that happen in practice.
Great. I know that Jamie, you had a question about the blending and braiding of funds. Do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure. So are cities allowed to blend and braid federal funding to build integrated data systems, assuming the data systems are related to federal grants that they've received?
So the answer is going to be yes and no. The use of the term blending and braiding can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Again, at the end of the day, it's going to matter what the individual programs are and their underlying statutes. So yes, you definitely can use funds from multiple programs in order to fund infrastructure. Which programs and how you are doing that really is going to depend on what individual programs you are receiving funding from. It's just the term braiding and blending can sometimes mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
So can you say more, Deirdre, as we're waiting for more questions to come in, about what individual agencies are doing to help cities prioritize the data and investments in their own locations, in their own communities?
Sure, absolutely. So right now, as of October 1st, all of the changes to the Uniform Grants Guidance are going into effect government-wide, right? There is going to be a process here over the next couple of months, and in some cases, probably the better part of the next year or two, to get to full implementation. As part of that, they are updating terms and conditions for existing awards and making sure that all newer awards are taking into account the updated changes to the Uniform Grants Guidance. In this case, this is a clarification of existing policy. I can tell you I have had similar conversations like this dozens of times with my federal partners about this is not a change in policy. This is something we want to make sure that recipients are aware of and are able to use. And so they are being encouraged to ask about what are your data and evaluation plans for this particular program, and how are you going to make sure that across programs you are setting up the infrastructure to do that. So it is going to be an ongoing process, but this is one of those clarifications. And so it really is going to take a discussion between recipients and federal agencies to get this right.
Great. We have a question from Phoenix. My question is for cities, departments wanting to use the increased de minimis rate. Would it matter if a previously negotiated rate is in place for a specific department and is not used citywide?
So for new awards that are issued after a couple of weeks ago, you can use the new updated de minimis rate. If you're talking about an existing award, you're going to have to work with your agency partners to make sure that you can update the terms and conditions. But you should be able to use the de minimis for all new awards that have been issued after October 1st, government-wide.
Okay, helpful. One other question, is there a limit to how much money can be spent on data and evaluation or community engagement for one particular grant?
So that's another one where unfortunately it's going to depend on the individual programs, right? For the most part, we want to make sure that the federal funds are being used to deliver the outcomes of the program. But is there a hard, fast rule about what the percentage is? Again, not government wide. It really does depend on the particulars of the programs and the funding that is being used for those purposes.
Do we have any other questions? One last question. Where do we go when we have specific questions for our grant applications? Very good
Thank
question.
you so much. For your specific grant applications, I'm going to direct you to the agency that is issuing the notice of funding opportunity. So you should be going, there should be a point of contact at the top of the funding opportunities now about exactly who you should reach out to. But what I wanted to say was for questions about the Uniform Grants Guidance or in general, please find me and my team. I really do mean that. Please find us. There are two major ways to do that. First, and again, I'm going to ask folks to put this in the chat box for me, COFA.gov. Remember COFA like sofa, COFFA.gov. There are a number of resources there, not just about the changes, but also about how agencies are implementing it. There's going to be training that's coming out government-wide and a number of other things. So go to COFA.gov, and there is a way to find us and the support team there. The other is to reach out to me at ONB and my team, and I will make sure you all have that email address in the chat box as well. We are here to answer your questions. We will get back to you. I have a very small but mighty team in OFFM, so I really do mean it. When you reach out to the inbox, it comes to me, but we can't help if we don't know. So please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask your questions. And if we are not the right ones to answer it for you, we will put you in touch with our agency partners who are.
Excellent. Deirdre, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. It's truly going to make a difference for local governments and for cities as they spend federal dollars. I see some hearts coming up from different people. So they very much appreciate all of the changes and that you've done. So thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to turn to our expert panel, Maya Jakimowicz, who is on the team, Results for America team. She is the Senior Advisor for Equity-Centered Program Design at Results for America. She also has worked in the city of Philadelphia, and she has worked at OMB herself. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Maya.
Great. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Thanks everyone so much for being here. I feel really honored to be able to moderate this panel. We have three wonderful experts who are joining us to help bring the Uniform Grants Guidance revisions to life. First, I'll introduce Ria Hubbard. Ria is the new director of the Office of Grants and Financial Assistance at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Previously, she served as a senior policy analyst at the White House Office of Management and Budget, where she worked with the team to develop the revisions that we're talking about today. And Ria also has a wealth of experience with federal grants beyond her new role at DOT and her work at OMB. She previously worked as a grants management specialist at the National Institutes of Health and at the Environmental Protection Agency as a grants policy specialist. Ria, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm also really pleased to introduce Kat Hartman. Kat is the Chief Data Officer for the City of Detroit. Kat has been with the city since 2018, where they previously served as the Director of Data Strategy and Analytics and also the Director of Innovation and Emerging Technology. Kat has extensive experience in data visualization, information design, and strategy and analysis. She's held many previous prestigious roles, including serving as an adjunct faculty for graduate studies in data visualization at the College for Creative Studies. And to round out the panel, we have Dr. Stephanie Dietrich. She is the Chief Data Analytics Officer in Tempe, Arizona. She's also an assistant professor at the Arizona State University School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. She's worked for the city for more than a decade, beginning in 2014. Thank you all so much for being with us today. And Ria, I'd like to start by turning it to you. Given your background working for OMB and now in your new role at the Department of Transportation, can you share with us your thoughts on how cities should be thinking about and leveraging this Uniform Grants Guidance as they prepare applications and conduct project planning for federal grants.
Yeah, well, thank you. First, just thank you for having me today at this webinar. I was delighted to see all the chats of folks introducing themselves, particularly all the grant officers and grant managers and administrators out there. Those are my people. I originally started out in operations a while back, as you mentioned, at the National Institutes of Health. So it's really great to be speaking directly with you all. So I'm in a relatively new office of the Department of Transportation, Office of Grants and Financial Assistance, and part of the reason that we established this office to support bipartisan infrastructure law is to help support just more consistent implementation of things like the uniform guidance across the department to make sure programs are aware and are, engaging with the recipients to make sure that they know that these are allowable costs. So my advice is very similar to what Deidre had, which is, as you see notice of funding opportunities out there, you see some discretionary grant applications or competitive opportunities, please do reach out to the department and engage, understand to the extent that, these costs are allowable. In preparation for this webinar, I did pull up several DOT NOFOs, and I couldn't find one that I pulled up that did not mention evidence or data. So I think the department's actually been doing a pretty good job encouraging those practices and even considering that as part of the evaluation of whether your application will actually be successful. So I think as a department, we've been doing a pretty good job encouraging our recipients to use evidence and data to support successful projects. So if there's ever a question about the allowability, please reach out because as Deidre mentioned, it is an allowable cost. And Jamie, getting back to your question a little bit ago about the blended and braiding, which that comes up quite a bit in terms of direct costs. I think one thing I did want to mention, just because indirect costs just came up in the terms of de minimis, is also consider it as an indirect. The uniform guidance also clarified these costs are allowable as direct or indirect. And the indirect, it could be part of perhaps part of the indirect cost pool moving forward. So that's just another consideration. Just put a bug in folks' ears as you think about how you're negotiating those federally negotiated rates, that maybe this is a true cost of doing business, is your data and analytics capability.
Rhea, do you mind saying just a little bit more about the direct and indirect costs and even clarifying what de minimis means? I saw a question in the chat a little earlier. We have some seasoned folks who've applied for many federal grants, but we have some newbies on the call as well. So can you go a little layer deeper into the direct versus indirect and also de minimis?
Okay, so let me just, if there's any indirect cost policy experts out there, one, hats off to you because it's a very complicated space. But for de minimis, what that means is that for an organization or locality that does not have a currently federally negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, many localities may, or you may not, that means that you can charge a de minimis rate of 15%. Like 15% total of your direct costs. You can charge more administrative type support costs. Separately, if you're negotiating a federally indirect cost rate agreement with the agency, which is part of the reason I kind of mentioned that to consider moving forward, is those are the type of costs that are organization wide. You can't tie them directly to a specific award. That is negotiated with the federal government. And part of that is think of your financial management, your internal controls. A lot of that is actually charged in award as an indirect cost, some of those overarching capabilities or support that an organization needs are charged as indirects under federal grants. And I would say that I could imagine a scenario, not being a federal negotiator myself, where if an organization is pulling up this capacity, and this is something that is important to the institution, you could argue that some of these, it could be part of the indirect cost pool and you could charge it as indirect costs, perhaps. I say that without actually negotiating them, but I just wanted to clarify the uniform guidance made that pretty explicit. It can be charged directly or indirectly. And in order for it to be charged directly, it'd have to be tied directly to a specific award, or you can just more broadly charge. If you have a 20% rate, you can charge 20% to the award as indirect cost. So I don't know, that may have been, I don't know if I clarified it all, but it is a complicated space, but hopefully that helped.
I'm hearing more options rather than fewer, so that's good.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Rhea. I appreciate it. I want to turn now to our city experts, Kat from Detroit and Dr. Dietrich from Tempe. I'm hoping that we can have a conversation about what the revisions to the Uniform Grants Guidance means to you and to your cities. And I think the place to start this conversation is first to understand how your city is already investing in data systems and evidence-based practices, evaluation, and community engagement projects in order to improve outcomes for your residents. To the extent that any of this work is already funded by federal grants, that's great. Please share that with us. But it doesn't need to be. We're trying to understand your current state of practice. Kat, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I lead the data strategy and analytics team at the City of Detroit. I report into our CIO. We see our team as developing the strategy required to get to advanced analytics. And really what that means is a lot of data governance and aligning both people processes as well as tech investments in a way that we can get the most out of our data assets as an organization. So we really want to reduce the time and human intervention required for more sophisticated analytics. So in my opinion, we're still pretty fledgling, but we've built a really strong foundation and very excited to see how we can segue these clarified guidance from OMB into additional work in the future. I will say we've had incredible help going through the What Works City certification process, just as a way to kind of educate our entire city about fundamental approaches to managing data, as well as participation in Bloomberg's City Data Alliance. So if anyone has questions about those, but I would highly recommend going through those processes. We cut our teeth as a new and small but mighty team managing all of the COVID data during the pandemic, and our ability to integrate data from all across the city that was buried in a crisis and in spreadsheets on 1 million local machines really allowed us to track the impact of the pandemic, as well as make data-driven decisions about how to plan and report and pivot effectively throughout that. As some sort of karmic reality, we have now transitioned to manage all outcome and output data, plus all the financial data related to ARPA-funded projects meant to, get our city out of that hole. So it's been really exciting to just build this large culture of data over the last roughly 6 years that I've been there, but 4 years really focused. I can continue on. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to jump into.
That's great. We'll pause there and we'll ask Dr. Dietrich to jump in and we'll continue talking about these examples. Thank you.
Still in 2024, not unmuting myself. So I think I have a lot of similar kind of things I oversee, as Kat mentioned. My team started very small with one person, and I'm now at 7 people, not including myself. The city just made a fairly significant investment to grow our team for just the expanded use of data in the city and the types of activities that we're trying to foster and support. And I think that the timing is really great with the change in the grant guidance, because I have more resources in place to help have those conversations with departments and really be strategic about the types of things that they are trying to include, the types of data they're trying to collect, the evaluations that they're doing. For us, it's also good timing because our Strategic Management and Innovation Office is hiring a grants program manager, and we're creating a kind of grants office as part of that group to help facilitate, kind of broader reviews of grant applications that are going in, helping to identify, potential opportunities the city might have, which is why the website that she mentioned when we started, I was trying to scribble that address down, and I can't wait to share it with people of all the different programs that are out there. I think one of the things that I'm pretty excited about for this, beyond data, because woo, data nerd, is the community engagement portion and being able to support that work. In 2018, the city Strategic Management Innovation Office put in for an innovation fund grant, which was a one-time grant that our city council is doing to help fund creation of a framework called Equity in Action that was focused on increasing equity in the ability of people to participate in citywide decisions. And the city has been invested in engagement for a very long time. We've had a framework for doing that. But what we were really interested in improving was providing opportunities that underrepresented communities to participate in the decision-making process and to make sure that their voices are being heard and to provide opportunities for them to engage in a way that was meaningful to them, that met them where they are, that provided broad opportunities to make sure that we were engaging with all the people that were potentially going to be impacted by the decisions that we were making. And one of the things that I think is critical to that is having someone, or more than someone, groups that can help facilitate those conversations. So the city is not coming in and leading those conversations, but you have someone who's facilitating the community in leading those conversations and making sure that we're reaching the people that we really want to be able to reach. And I think that that facilitation process is critical. And the change in the language, I think, is going to provide some opportunities for us to specifically call those things out instead of doing what we're doing now, which is it's getting included, but it's kind of wrapped up in other things. And so it's not something that they can, explicitly call out as we're going to be doing this engagement or we're going to be leveraging evaluations, specifying that and the requesting that funding separate from the other work. Our sustainability and resilience department, I think, is an amazing example of leveraging equity in action and really ensuring that they are engaging with populations that are vulnerable to extreme heat. And they do a lot of these community meetings to provide the foundation for all the work they do. They had this type of activity when they were developing their climate action plan. And so being able to request funding to support that work, I think will provide a great foundation for all their work going forward. So I think this is going to be really helpful for us.
Right. And you jumped right into my next question. So you are reading my mind about like how you think you guys can leverage these revisions and clarifications locally. And so, this community engagement example is a perfect one. And I saw the question in the chat about some specific examples. So I'll just say out loud part of what's in the document that got dropped into the chat, the explainer document, which says that federal funds can be used to cover specific community engagement expenses, including, for example, stipends, per diems, travel allowances to reduce financial barriers to community engagement, printing materials in other languages, hiring a sign language interpreter. These, I think, are all really great examples, and having it being stated explicitly is particularly helpful so that it's an allowable cost rather than having to go back and forth and confirm. So Kat, maybe you can jump back in and tell us about now having also learned about some of these revisions and clarifications. What are your thoughts for how Detroit can leverage these for future federal grant opportunities?
Yeah, so I think, I've started thinking in terms of direct and indirect costs for some of the work that we're doing and how to kind of explain some of it to our departments. So one kind of, those integrated data systems, I think, are really, really important to stress the value on. So we spent quite a bit of time developing a data schema that we call the base units, which allows us to quickly join location data all across the city. So it's sort of the way that we standardize our enterprise data warehouse. And zip various departmental data that was once siloed and separate and very clunky to work with together. And this has allowed us to do a lot of powerful things. So in my mind, we're trying to productify or create a platform out of data governance that we keep up to date for everyone to use. So we are not the departments who are the subject matter experts on any given data set, but we are the subject matter experts on integrating and getting that return of investment. So we were able to use that data in that database in a exciting way to power our community benefits ordinance. So there is a decree from City Council that we at the city inform residents within a given city radius of any given development project, so that they can come to various meetings and weigh in on what's going on. But before we tackled managing these addresses, it was very spotty, our address quality and the ability to actually outreach. And so while very small, just the ability to get mail to our residents, it's also really exciting. And the flip side of that, I think, is our ability to integrate data from our utility departments as well as our buildings department related to permits. All of this allowed us to put together a successful census challenge to challenge an undercount in our city. It was integrated data that allowed us to provide actual evidence to that. So that is, a much larger scale, but the same kind of small nuts and bolts that we put together that will increase federal funds for a variety of programs coming into our city over the next several years. So, big and small impacts. And I'll stop there.
Thanks. Ria, I think hearing what Dr. Dietrich and Kat have shared with us about how they're thinking about leveraging the Uniform Grants Guidance, it'd be great to hear from you and the federal perspective about how can the fact that cities incorporate enhanced data and evaluation and community engagement practices, how can that improve their federal grant applications? Does it make them more competitive for funding? In what ways? And sorry, as Ria's thinking about her response to the question, folks, I'd like to ask you also, if you have questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll pivot to a Q&A as well after this.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sets, I think, cities up for success in the end. Again, as I stated kind of initially, is that I went back and was looking at a bunch of DOT notice of funding opportunities in preparation for this webinar, just curious and see what we articulate publicly. And it is a very clear evaluation criteria in many cases that if it's the extent the applicant can demonstrate, what evidence they have that this project will improve certain outcomes, it strengthens the application and it'll be received more favorably generally. So that is all articulated in our notice of funding opportunities. And in fact, DOT has also put out a bunch of resources that I can pop into the chat to help communities and like cost benefit analysis and other things and other considerations that there's an applicant checklist of things to consider. And a lot of it is focused on data and evidence. So I'm happy to share those resources as well. But certainly it definitely strengthens your ability to receive federal funds and applications from a DOT perspective.
Thank you. If folks have questions for the panel, please drop them in. In the meantime, I'd love to hear a little bit more from Kat and Dr. Dietrich about how you're using your evidence-based strategies and data and community engagement practices to really promote equity in your city. Yeah, maybe we can start with you, Dr. Dietrich.
I think that on the data side, one of the things that we've really been trying to focus on is identifying ways that we can develop data sets that can be used for more than one purpose that focus on equity. And so an example of that was also funded using a grant was the creation of a heat vulnerability index, which can basically looks at, extreme heat and then vulnerable population data. So it's looking at race, it's looking at income, it's looking at age. So for extreme heat events, older populations have a higher risk. And those data, we brought those data together along with some other environmental factors to come up with a heat vulnerability index that is done by Census Tract for this first pass. And those data are being used by both our climate group, but also our transit and transportation group to help prioritize where grant dollars are being spent. So an example on the sustainability side is a grant that they had to allow people who are living in mobile homes to do energy efficient, energy cooling activities for their residents. And the way they identified the mobile home park location is in part using that heat vulnerability data along with demographic data, and then some other federal data resources. And so I think that kind of that idea of identifying data that could be universally used for a specific area of the city, I think could be really helpful. And again, speaking on that equity and action side, having bilingual resources and materials, sign language interpreters, all of those types of resources and support that we can have in place to allow a diverse group of people to participate, and then making sure that we have someone who is doing outreach to those groups so that they know that they can participate and they're aware that those resources are there, I think is really critical. And I think grant funding supports all of that type of work that we may not be able to do otherwise without having that external funding from these grants.
Thank you. Kat, did you want to jump in?
Sure. So we have been using all of our ARPA funds as sort of a way to build a new culture around performance management and equity. It really gave us, a wider way to influence what departments are doing, because we work together with the grants office to identify very specific ways that we wanted to report to the federal government. And so one of those was associated with equity. So through the process, we developed a disaggregated demographic data standard. So basically any ARPA funded project that was serving individuals, households, or businesses needed to track a certain segment of our data demographic data standard. So it's basically a lot of like what you would find in the ACS or the census. So pretty simplified, but still very powerful. And it was not being consistently tracked across the city prior. And so that's really exciting. We plan to have the ability to create, because of this work, to actually have an equity framework that we can take on into future work that is really informed by Detroit specifics. One thing I feel like is important to really stress is that Detroit has federally recognized like 80% of our census tracts are qualified census tracts. And so there's a lot of need in Detroit, but when you look from neighborhood to neighborhood, even block to block, street to street, there's a lot of difference in need. And so being able to actually articulate that in a way to do planning around is also something we've been really focused on. So we've taken similar to what you all are doing, we've developed a vulnerability index as well that's not just focused on climate, but also, many of the resilience metrics are also, related to need in general. And so, not just focusing on income, but also all these other variety of things that folks are dealing with on the ground. And so, yeah, we feel really good about that. And that's a product we plan to carry on. And it was essentially, built by ARPA.
Thank you. We had a couple of questions come in the meantime. Ria, I want to punt over to you. One, I think is a quick answer, which from Katie, does the Uniform Grants Guidance say about data cost? Does it only apply to post-award expenditures or also pre-award?
Well, more broadly, it depends, but I'd say that that's almost always the answer in grants policy parlance. But generally, I mean, you're right. So most grants are cost reimbursable. So you're going to be reimbursed associated with the activities of that given award. So it would be mostly in the post-award side. I think I think we need to start thinking of these. This is maybe a RIA perspective, but I think it's also consistent with like what I'm seeing government-wide happening even within federal agencies. Is I think we need to start thinking of these costs as like organizational cost. Like this is the cost of doing business almost. Like, and I see that a lot in the federal space where I'm constantly meeting with my CDO constantly, and like like everyone is like actively engaged. Like everyone has like recognition that this is important capability and the cost of doing business and just where we're at. So it is true, it's mostly on the post-award side that you'd be able to be directly reimbursed on a given award, like for direct cost. But I think it would be really interesting to see it change more to this mindset of like these are organizational costs. Maybe this should be part of the indirect cost pool, and like this is the cost of doing business, just like good financial management, et cetera. So
Great. And then the other question I wanted to pose to you too came in from Kathy. She asks, do you have any specific suggestions for very small and disadvantaged cities who don't have the staff to support these kind of efforts for data collection and evaluation? I saw some folks chatting her in here as well, talking about working with local organizations and universities. But Ria, I'm curious from your experience at DOT, but also previously with NIH and EPA, how you guys have navigated these situations.
So I think one thing that immediately came to mind is like there might actually be federal grant opportunities, which I think was some of what's going on in the chat. There might be federal grant opportunities to help build that capacity. So even at DOT for transportation projects, we have like planning grants where a lot of this would be part of the planning phase, like part of the actual expenditures associated with that given planning award. So, and I know it's really hard, like, and as Deidre mentioned, like we're doing all this work in the federal space as well to make people aware of all these different federal programs. And certainly there's a lot of opportunities for improvement to make sure that recipients are aware of these opportunities, but there are federal funds available for this purpose, I would say. So that's kind of that's the immediate thought that came to mind, is like there might actually be federal funds available to actually support those activities. And also DOT also has a lot of technical assistance. I sent you all the DOT Navigator, and there's some links to technical assistance related work that we have at the department as well.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a great conversation. It sounds like we could keep going for a while, but our time is coming to an end. So I'd love to ask all of our panelists just to give us one final piece of advice as we're going through the Uniform Grants Guidance and learning about what we can do and how best to leverage it. And in the meantime, the poll, the Zoom administrators are going to put up the poll also for the end of this webinar. We'll start with you, Ria.
I think consistent with what Deidre said, like reach out. OMB has made themselves available. I'm also available to this extent folks have questions from the Department of Transportation, but don't hesitate to reach out to our federal partners. I know sometimes it can feel a little intimidating and you're not really sure what question you have, but really do try to engage and reach out to the federal agencies.
Thank you. Kat?
I would say it's a real success story. We've spent much of our ARPA funding on funding full-time employees and, super skilled, low six-figure salaries. And we really have some extraordinary engineers and data architects, and the ability for us to create infrastructure for the city that is exactly what the city needs has been kind of amazing. We also spent, we spent money on people over platforms too. So we really invested in learning how to combine open source technologies. So that has been another way to kind of keep our real costs down in that way, but also create a very modular and very flexible system that we feel really good about. So open source.
Thank you. Dr. Dietrich.
I would say to have really good relationships with whoever your data people are. So if you have a chief data officer in the city, or if you don't have a dedicated data team, you have data nerds somewhere. And those data nerds are happy to talk about data. And so if you're not sure how to integrate data, same thing with evaluation nerds, where I'm just generally nerdy across all those things. But if you reach out to those individuals, even if you don't have a dedicated department or group that does that, a lot of them like to be involved in things like this and are happy to brainstorm ways that maybe you haven't thought about, where you could leverage funding for data related activities or to support evaluations or community engagement. And so that's one of the reasons I'm excited about this, is there is a very clear line of why we would be engaged in these conversations. But that idea of trying to provide funding for people to support this type of work, I think, is really also interesting. But I guess my main advice is find the data and evaluation nerds.
Thank you. And my piece of advice, it builds off of yours, which is really to start talking with your local colleagues before and while a grant, you're considering applying for a grant. Think about how you can allocate in your budget specifically costs for data, community engagement, evaluation, investing in evidence-based programs. It's so much easier to do on the front end than to do it in the midst of grant implementation. So start building those relationships now, and when a new grant opportunity comes in, hopefully you can align together. I'm going to turn it back to Michelle to wrap us up.
Thank you, Maya. And thank you to all of our panelists. I'll add one more resource that will help local governments understand how to build this data and evidence capacity, which is the Results for America's Local Practice Guide. Has a lot of great information about building evidence and data capacity. We're going to add a survey to the chat. One more survey, and we'll hope you'll fill it out before you take off. This is a survey for cities that have won funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the Inflation Reduction Act, so that we can learn about the challenges you're facing in receiving the money and implementing the project. Really important for us to be able to feed this back to the federal government, the federal agencies. Then starting in January, we're going to be offering a boot camp that focuses on the most pressing implementation issues, from grants management to procurement. So we want to know what is troubling you most and how we can help the agencies address it. But then also we will have this boot camp that can help you address these challenges as well. We want it to be as sort of most well-tailored as possible. So the more information you can put in the survey, the better. Also, a reminder about our next session. It's going to be on Tuesday, November 19th, after the election. We will be hosting a session to mark the anniversary of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This will be an opportunity to celebrate the impact of the projects in your cities. You can register for the session in the link that we've posted in the chat. So we will see you all next time. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you to celebrate the anniversary of the infrastructure law. Thanks so much. Bye.